We'll call the meeting to order. This meeting of September 2nd. We'll note that all commissioners are present, and the first item of business is the order of business. Are there any changes or additions to the order of business? Hearing none, would there be a motion to approve the order of business?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Motion carries. We'll move to the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda you wish to discuss? Not, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Decker?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. So we'll move to the non-timetable agenda. And the first item there is the 2015 budget. This will be the consideration regarding the first reading. And Mr. Kessel, is there anything you'd like to say about the budget?
Thank you, President Johnson and Commission. I do have a few things that I would like to say about the budget. You should have had a document that was distributed to you earlier today that summarizes the budget as it stands at this moment. I will say that there will be changes expected to that budget. We hope to have them all completed and before the public hearing, so that when the public hearing comes, it is a final draft, so to speak. This budget is much different than previous year's budgets for several reasons. I'd just like to outline a few of them. We've had the inclusion of the wastewater reclamation facility for a full year's operation, which of course is a facility that we've not had in the past. We've also had several other sewer-related structures, like the influent pump station and several lift stations that are online that weren't in the past. That will allow us to also bring service to the refinery and to the city of South Hart. Again, things that we've never done in the past. We'll also have reuse water available. That'll be the first time that we'll have a product that we can sell that won't be potable in nature. So there's a lot of intricacies with regard to how to get that product to market. It's certainly in our best interest to sell as much of that water as possible to finance the many capital improvements that we are undertaking. We're moving to a fleet vehicle management system, and we are also changing our landfill operations to a loose fill. We've used a baler in the past, and we'll be changing those operations to a much different loose fill operation. The Public Safety Center is scheduled for completion in about July or August of next year, so we'll have a partial year operation of that facility, full year operation at the Public Works facility, and a full year operation at the animal shelter. We'll also be realigning some of operational staff within departments, and the Dickinson Regional Community Service Program will be brought in-house and operated by the Dickinson PD. The execution of the West Dickinson Plan, that's a document that we expect to see completion by the end of this year, probably November, possibly December, and we'll have many recommendations for the 2015 and beyond in regards to how to build out that plan. And one of the major differences this year is the expected increase in formula funding from the state of North Dakota. The document before you does include the formula funding that is being presented by Senator Rich Wardner and another group of cohorts. It does include a surge payment, and it does include the 60-40 split, which is much different than the existing 75-25 split. Now, the other thing I'll mention about changes is, we have a lot more maintenance obligations as we have built out roadways and our network of transportation in the community, including the interim bypass, 10th Avenue West, State Avenue, Westridge Drive, etc. So all of these require not only snow plowing, but right-of-way. We have to maintain the right-of-ways, so there's a lot of extra work that goes into that. In relation, we've had over 37 requests for full-time staff by our departments. And so the challenge is making sure that we're able to stay with the commissioner's pledge of no increase in property taxes, and yet making sure we meet the expectations of the residents when it comes to service delivery. So we'll be creating and refining the budget between now and the public hearing. I also wanted to just mention three other things. We're doing this in the absence of a finance director. We had 18 applicants for the position of Deputy City Administrator. We'll be refining that to the top 7, which will start interviews very, very shortly, and hopefully we'll have a candidate before you within the next few weeks. The way that we conduct this budget is through a series of 51 spreadsheets. Those spreadsheets are all interrelated. They're all linked in some capacity, so when you make a change to one, it definitely affects another, and sometimes 3 or 4. It's a difficult way to conduct a budget of the size that we are today. Back in 2010, our budget as a total was $21 million, $19 million operating and $2 million in capital. Our 2014 infrastructure budget alone in 2015, if you include all in, is over $250 million. So we've become a much more complicated community when it comes to try to budget for operations and for capital. And I think the last thing I'd like to mention is we will collect about $4 million in property taxes from the community. And the police budget alone is $5.3 million. So property taxes are a necessary revenue stream, but they represent a very small portion of the total budget that we work with on an annual basis. So with that, if there's any questions, I'll try to answer those. And please, again, understand that we'll have revisions from first reading we expect tonight and second reading that we expect the first meeting in October. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Kessel? Mr. Colling, is this ordinance 1559?
Yes, Mr. President, 1559.
Okay, well, while you're thinking about questions or comments, I'll ask if there's anyone from the public that would like to comment regarding proposed ordinance number 1559. If you'd like to comment, you may do so now. Just come to the podium, state your name, and we'll hear your comments. Okay, there's no one from the public that wants to comment. I know all of you are just fresh out of the budget meeting that we held last Thursday, I think it was. So it's not too many days have elapsed since then. We had a full day of budgets. Maybe I can, currently what, I know you've assumed no property tax increase other than what we estimate to be from new properties coming on the tax rolls. Currently, what number are you carrying for a transfer from the oil impact fund to the general fund?
Currently, that number sits at $1.5 million. After the meeting that we held, there was much discussion about staff and such. One of the ways in which to pay for staff could be by increasing that number to $2 million. But as it's presented to you today, it's a $1.5 million transfer.
And I assume you don't have all 37 requested employees in here, but do you have some new general fund positions currently in this budget?
There are some general fund positions that are in this budget, but as you mentioned, it's a far cry from the 37 that have been requested. The budget does include a accounting manager, a GIS GIS technician position. I think those are the only two that we included to date so far.
So no investigator, no additional full-time firefighters at this point?
Not at this point, but I do expect to add those two or those three at a minimum, and depending on how the numbers flush out, a few more.
I know this is a challenge for you because you're doing two jobs, the city administrator job and the city finance job, and as you pointed out, the city finances are much more complex today than just even a handful of years ago. So I would expect that we would continue to see changes all along here, all the way through the final reading, which would be, I suppose, 4 weeks from today. So, I know you mentioned to me in conversation, I don't think you mentioned it in your report, but our former finance director you have a meeting with her in a few days to help go through these spreadsheets and I assume check for accuracy.
Yes, and she's, Ms. Johnson has agreed to meet on Thursday. She knew these worksheets inside and out, very, very good, and adept at working her way through and understanding when what change was made in a certain column that it affected spreadsheet 37 and 42. I'm not as adept at that, and so I'm really looking forward to that meeting.
I think while this has been a lot of work for you, I think it's been a valuable learning experience having to get in here and do this, and I think and we talked about this at the budget meeting, but perhaps one of the things that we've learned from this is that the city's too large, too complex to do this with Excel spreadsheets. We have to utilize accounting and budgeting software that is really designed for a city of this size and complexity.
And I'm glad you recognize that. There is, within this budget, dollars to purchase software. In fact, I'm attending the ICMA conference a little later next week, and there's many vendors there, especially technology vendors, where I'll have an opportunity to go through and meet with them and potentially find a product that will work for us. But in the meantime, I've also met with our IT coordinator, and he's working on a budget sheet that would really help simplify the way we're doing it today.
Okay, and I think it points out, too, the need that when we do find a deputy city administrator, that he or she has a strong finance and accounting background.
Absolutely. I think that's it's the number one skill that I'm certainly looking at in those 18 applicants to hire.
So, well, those are my comments. Comments from other commissioners?
Mr. Kessel, you indicated that there were 2 positions in the general fund. The total positions we were talking about, the budget was 8.5?
Well, yeah, my goal was to have at least that many funded and still meet the parameters by which the city commission has placed upon me. And if a additional transfer from 1.5 to 2 million in the oil impact fund, that would mean an additional approximately 6.5 positions could be funded if we're comfortable with that level of a transfer.
In addition to the 8?
Yes, at that time. So we'd be looking at between 13 and 16 positions.
I thought in response to my question, you said you had like 3 in this budget.
I only have 2 in the budget as we speak.
In the general fund.
In the general fund.
Yeah, an additional $500,000 wouldn't support another, I mean, that might support another 7 or 8.
If we're relegating our discussion to simply the general fund, that's certainly an accurate statement. But there are also positions outside the general fund that have been requested.
In the enterprise fund?
Correct.
And they're in this budget?
No, they're not.
They're
This is the general fund. Yeah.
Okay.
And at this point, you have a zero use of cash, which means, you know, if our numbers are accurate, we have a balanced budget. And that's one of the, I mean, I understand that's one of your concerns. That's one of the reasons you're meeting with Mrs. Johnson, is to make sure that we haven't inadvertently generated more revenue or less expense than what's going to happen with all the interconnectivity of these
That's exactly correct.
Excel
Yeah.
sheets.
That is one of my biggest concerns, because of the interconnectivity that you mentioned, that we may be overstating or understating either a revenue or an expense item that could be significant.
So I'm going to assume the commission would like you to have a priority listing of the new positions that you would, I mean, the way you would recommend they be added. So if the commission, say at its second meeting here in September, says we're willing to move the $1.5 million transfer from the oil impact fund to something higher, we have your priority.
Yep.
Would that be what you'd like to see?
Yep. I'll plan to submit a prioritization of new positions.
All right. Well, I think, anybody else want to comment?
I'd like to, I know we're talking about annual budget here, but if I were watching and listening to us on Channel 19, while I'd be interested in the annual budget, I also hear about the capital expenditures of 100 to 150 million, these huge numbers. I know we have a plan. We have a couple of plans on how to handle the debt that goes with those capital expenditures, but I wonder if you could summarize that for our taxpayers as to what is really going to happen.
Certainly, I can do that. That's a good question, Commissioner Jackson. In terms of debt repayment, we are authorized for $82 million in SRF, or State Revolving Loan Fund dollars. Those SRF funds are intended to pay for all of our wastewater needs. So the wastewater treatment facility, the influent pump station, all of our lift stations, anything related to wastewater will be funded through our SRF loan. We also have a loan from Wells Fargo. We've committed to up to $15 million in that loan. That would be used more for general purposes. Currently, things like the public safety facility are scheduled to be utilized in that loan. We also, of course, issued a bond for the West River Community Center, and we've made a commitment of 30% of our 1% sales tax and 75% of our hospitality tax. Now, because we've made those commitments from those revenue sources, it doesn't mean that all of the revenue has to come from them as we've committed. We can use other revenue sources. We just simply cannot allocate those revenue streams to other indebtedness in the future. We've committed on the Wells Fargo $15 million, and I anticipate that we'll only utilize about $12 million of that 15, but the half-cent sales tax is what we've committed to pay that loan back. On the SRF side, we've committed to use water and sewer rates, and you'll hear a discussion this evening on the water rate side, and we did change our sewer rates earlier this year. We are not recommending a change based on the change that was made earlier this year. So those are the commitments that we've made for those dollars. We were certainly helped by the Water Commission, who provided us with an $18.4 million grant. That's paying for a great deal of our water projects. It covers 60% of construction and 35% of engineering. And the remainder, the majority of those remaining funds are formula, or what we're calling GPT, or gross production tax revenue streams, so that we're not incurring a debt. We're going to pay for those as those revenues come in. So all said and done, we're expecting that we'll be approximately $115 to $120 million in debt with the combination of those three different debts I mentioned.
Is it fair to say that we are guess I'll use the word optimistic, that a good portion of that debt will ultimately be paid through some kind of return of oil taxes.
Yes, actually, and that's another great question. In 2015, 16, 17, and 18, that's as far out as we have budgeted so far. And as you know, as you get further and further out from today, budgets get a little bit fuzzier. We have predicted that all of our debt payments will be made using formula dollars, or revenue that comes to the city of Dickinson from the state of North Dakota using oil taxation. So, and that does result in a rather large number every year. We're probably going to be incurring between $7 and $8 million in annual debt payments to make those $115 to $120 million of recovery.
And my last question would be, those of us who are a little bit older remember that in the 70s and 80s, we were left with a lot of debt that had to do with special assessments. Is it true that we currently have essentially almost no special assessments in this community?
We will be conducting a special assessment distribution again this year. I believe that, I'd have to verify my number, but we're in that 4 to 7 range when it comes to special assessment debt in total. We've chosen, as a commission, you chose to use the Future Fund as the revenue source. So that created a limiting factor on how much special assessment debt that we were willing to incur. And so we've stuck to that. In fact, we've issued that amount of debt, or shortly will, and we've eliminated that program. So we no longer have a specified program for developers to utilize special improvements districts. Now that may not mean that we're approached in the future about issuing special assessment debt. We're finding that a lot of these projects where either one property owner on one side of the street and the other have differing development timeframes. So I would expect that the commission will be approached within the near future about additional special assessment debt to help with situations where you have a conflict between development timeframes in the future.
I guess the point I'm trying to make, that I hope everybody hears, and when I do get questions, I don't get that many, but when I do, it usually has to do with these tremendous capital expenditures that we're making. Mm-hmm. So the point is that we have a plan, and we also have a backup plan.
Mm-hmm.
If plan A doesn't work. I think it's important that we talk about that once in a while. Thanks for your explanation.
You bet. You're welcome.
I think if Senator Wardner's program goes through without significant changes, and if oil production and oil prices are close to his estimates, during the next biennium we'd receive $130 million. In round numbers, the way this would work is about $14 million of that $130 million would go towards debt and principal payment, give or take a little bit. If you move up to $2 million a year to transfer from the Oil Impact Fund, then $4 million would go to the general fund. So 4 and 14 is 18. That would leave $112 million over a 2-year period then for additional infrastructure projects, and no additions in debt. Actually, we would see a reduction in debt somewhat. And then again, when it comes to the West River Community Center expansion, that debt is serviced by the 30% of the first 1%, and also by the hospitality tax. And right today, unless there's a significant downward adjustment in our economy, those two funds can service that debt quite handily. I think you don't bond for just a 5-year period, but we almost had enough money flowing into that fund to pay that debt off in a 5 or 6 year period, so.
We had very strong
Yeah.
sales tax collections in August, 1.3 million. So that's a good sign so far. Sales taxes have been running quite well for us in 2014.
Okay, other comments? And
Thank you for your patience.
if not, would there be a motion regarding first reading of ordinance 1559?
Move to approve, Mr. President.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have the motion and the second. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Decker?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. So I think we got time where we can do item B, and that's Missouri River stakeholder attendees. And Mr. Kessel, can you introduce that?
Thank you, President Johnson. At our last commission meeting, we had a presentation with regard to the Missouri River stakeholders meeting that'll be coming up in November. They requested attendance by city commissioners. We have had interest from Commissioner Jackson, Steiner, and Decker to attend that meeting. We have made room reservations for all three, and including myself as well. And so we are planning that if they can all make it. I know Mr. Jackson may or may not be able to in the end, but we have a good interest, and I think that bodes well for making sure that our collective thoughts are provided at the meeting.
And do we need to take any formal action on that, or we can just agree that those are the three that are going? And
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I don't think you need to take a formal motion. I also should mention that if all three are able to attend, there are special provisions within state law that that allow an exemption so that we don't have to worry about a quorum being present at the meetings itself. This same exemption applies to, like, for instance, North Dakota League of Cities meetings and other congregate meetings such as that. So.
okay, thank you. Well, let's squeeze the financial report in then. Anything you want to say about it? You've been working pretty hard on the budget.
Yeah, thank you. I really don't have any comments to report. I know that we've had some audit adjustments that were recommended that we have not made yet. So it does mean that there's some categories that look a little strange. We will make those, but they have not been made to this point. So beyond that, unless there's questions, I'll let your infinite wisdom make your inferences.
Well, you said sales tax revenues are running strong, and so we have 7 months worth of data, and I believe, the 1.5 cent sales tax through 7 months is up about 16%, which is very strong. The hospitality tax is up 15.4, and the occupancy tax is up 21.5%. So we're 7 months into the year. These are pretty lofty numbers. They might settle down a little bit, but I wouldn't expect too much settling. I think, again, it indicates that the economy here is very strong, and this is a significant gain, and it's coming on a pretty large base to begin with. So.
And based on the construction that we're happening right now and the anticipated openings next year of certain retail establishments, I'm going to make an assumption that we'll have a strong year in 2015 as well.
Yeah, a lot going on, so, okay. Anything else? Any other comments or questions on the financial report that's for you? If not, would there be a motion to approve it?
I'll move we approve the financial report.
Second.
We have the motion, the second. Further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Jackson? Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Decker?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, so the motion carries. We have a 5 o'clock timetable item, and that's to hear a presentation by Scott Karski. It's a variance request. Is there anyone at the table that's introducing this? Mr. Colling is?
Mr. President, I can do that. The variance request that's in your packet is with respect to the city's wellhead spacing ordinance. As you may recall, the ordinance has been in effect for many years, which prohibited a well from being located less than 100 feet from any building or structure. Back in 2012, the city did increase that spacing distance from 100 feet to 300 feet. Since that time, there have been two variances that have been brought before the commission and approved. The first variance was in December of 2012, approving a reduction of the variance spacing, or the wellhead spacing from 300 feet to 100 feet. That was in Cook Meadow Hills Edition. The second variance that was granted was just in 2013 for a wellhead that is located in the Dickinson Hills development area. And in that case, also the distance was reduced from 300 feet to 150 feet. On both of those cases, the individuals requesting that variance had brought some information to the city indicating that the nature of the wells was such that it did not require a 300-foot spacing distance, specifically that these were injection wells or had other characteristics that did not require a 300-foot spacing distance. The application is in your packet materials, and I believe the applicant here is requesting a reduction of the spacing distance from 300 feet to 200 feet. Mr. Karski is in the audience tonight, and I believe would like to address you regarding his variance request.
Mr. Karski, welcome.
Thank you, President Johnson, Commissioners. As you can see in your packets, I did put numerous information on how this is related to the other wells that were granted variances. You can see this is an injection well. Talking to some industry professionals, it's a lodgepole vertical well, the safest well on the planet. Some of the characteristics of lodgepole crude, it's a setup point of 60 degrees, which means it starts to gel at about 60 degrees. So in cold weather, if it hits, if anything happens, a spill or anything, the ground is very easy to clean up on that. They are very safe wells. This was platted long before the ordinance went into effect. And I've listed some other things in your packet, and I'm here to entertain any questions on this.
Mr. Karski, when did you purchase the lots?
I purchased, actually lot 13 is the one, December of last year. And then I added on another, up to the fence on the oil well site, another 75 feet of lot 12. And I kind of planned that as a boundary in between the lot when I intended on building. But the nature of this setback really limits my construction on the size. And yes, this ordinance was there, Commissioner Steiner, before I purchased the lot, but I had seen that this was granted in the past. The waivers were when I purchased this. So I assumed that I could come to the commission and present a case, especially being the type of well it is and the type of production. You can see this well produces about 15 barrels a day on a good day. Numerous times this well, and it's been in production since 1996. Kind of an end-of-life lodgepole well is what we're getting to here.
Thank you.
Let me see if I understand, Mr. Karski. You own all of Lot 13 and the west 75 feet of Lot 12?
That is correct.
Okay.
And you can see in the diagrams where the 300-foot setback is and the 250, I had those drawn up. And also the 150 comes right to the end of my lot, the west 75 portion of Lot 12 on that.
Does the 300 feet cross into Lot 13?
Halfway into there, yes,
Halfway into
President
Lot
Johnson.
13, okay.
Absolutely. And even the 250-foot does cross into there. 200-foot will go halfway through that 75-foot in Lot 12. And you can see located directly across the street to the north, there is residential apartments there in about within that 250, 200-foot setback. There are no offloading facilities. Everything's directly pipelined out of there. So you don't have any trucks, no loading, unloading. No tanks there. And the big risk at most oil well sites is the tanks for salt water and stuff, lightning strikes. There are absolutely 0 tanks at this site. If you compare it to the other variants you've granted, this is as safe or safer than the others.
They do have workover rigs that come in from time to time that work
Yes,
on the
they do.
well. Yeah. Other,
As well as checked, according to Denbury, twice a day. Once a day for sure, and twice a day since it is located within city limits. 1996, as far as I know, I've checked into, there hasn't been one incident of anything happening at that well.
Mr. President.
any other questions or comments for Mr. Karski?
Mr. Karski, I have a question for you. Do you know what your intentions are with regard to the lot? Are you going to build on it? Are you going to sell it?
I'm looking at both options right now. Originally when I bought this, this was to put up an office complex. In the meantime, within a month or two, the current owner of my current building finally decided to sell it to me, so I bought the building I'm in, and that opened up new options. I've had people talk to me about developing it. When I actually had a building put out, designed, laid out on there, and it was just so limited that for that area and a nice area where we could put a nice office building, a nice big one with parking, ample parking and everything, it really limited it for me.
What is that piece of land zoned right now?
CC.
CC?
Be a great spot for a restaurant or, something to that effect. Nice office complex. It is right across from the BLM there, and otherwise, I don't want to end up putting, storage units or something to that effect. Some type of barrier, an inhabitable barrier on that 75-foot might be a great option too.
Question for Mr. Colling. If we grant this, the way the variance will work is that it will then run with the land with both these tracks. Is that true, regardless of use?
Commissioner Jackson, the way our ordinance reads is the variance is at your discretion. It's something that you can place conditions upon as you deem appropriate. If you wanted to limit it to this owner, that would be acceptable. If you wanted it to run with the land, then we would make allowances for that in the variance resolution.
Okay.
When you're done with your questions and discussion with Mr. Karski, we'll ask for the city's position on this, city departments, but I want to make sure you get all your questions answered and comments heard here with Mr. Karski first. Anything else? Mr. Karski, anything else you want to say now?
Not at this time, President
Okay,
Johnson.
well, we'll ask you back, we'll ask if there are any city staff that wish to comment on this topic. I see the fire chief making his way up here, so Mr. Seebuck.
President Johnson, Commissioners, there's always a degree of confusion when we talk about Chapter 40 and we talk about the well ordinance. And one of the things that's forgotten is that the fire code does come into play. The 300-foot spacing to specific occupancies is not new. It's found in the fire code. It's been with us since at least the adoption of the International Fire Code, which we started adopting in the year 2000. There is to be a minimum of 300 feet to any assembly occupancy like a theater, a restaurant, a church, or a funeral parlor, to educational occupancies, and to institutional occupancies like group homes, hospitals or clinics, and correctional facilities. To my knowledge, none of these specific occupancies are in violation of that 300-foot spacing within the city limits. There's a new funeral home nearing completion in this area that was held to the 300-foot spacing requirement. What is fairly new is the inclusion of the residential occupancies that was not in the code. Wasn't in the code because a residential occupancy in the view of the code is not supposed to be immediately adjacent to an industrial facility like an oil well. So residential occupancies were never included until we recognized the danger and the hazard to life and occupancy and decided to include them in Chapter 40. The variance that was referred to with Cook Meadow Hills was based on a third-party engineering firm's written evaluation of a specific site and should not be taken as a blanket opinion of all well sites. The other variance that was Dickinson Hills. Dickinson Hills, Rolling Hills, there's a lot of hills, but Dickinson Hills, that specific well site, that specific well head, that spot, that doesn't have a pump jack on it. This has a pump jack on it. A well immediately to the east of this site has a pump jack on it also. Both of those sites do see workover rigs. We know from visiting with the funeral parlor that's being constructed out there that there are anchor points for the workover rig that will be on those well sites, or on that well site that's closest to their facility, located in their parking lot. Then they've been able to maintain the 300-foot spacing to the wellhead, which is required of an assembly occupancy, but they're going to end up with anchor points in their parking lot for a workover rig. There are commercial, business, and storage uses that the 300-foot occupancy or the 300-foot spacing requirement would not affect. An office building could be closer than that. An office complex with a restaurant in it, an assembly occupancy, that would be a problem. So there's some degree of confusion, but there are some areas, there are some definite occupancies that the 300-foot spacing won't affect. One of the things that's questionable, I guess, or that would help me is if the applicant could be more specific in his variance request as to what type of occupancy. We've never allowed, like I've said before, the 300-foot spacing to be reduced for a group A, E, or I assembly. We don't want a preschool or a daycare 200 feet from a well site, whether it's the safest well in North Dakota history or not. So in considering this request, I'd ask the Commission to keep the 300-foot spacing to specific use groups in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Sivak. Are there any comments or questions for the chief? For you, anybody? Okay. Anybody else from the city wish to comment? Mr. Curtin, or Mr. Coley, either one of you, could you give us a quick education on what CC zoning does allow?
Mr. President, Commissioners, CC allows most of your commercial buildings, commercial land uses. What it does is it limits the outdoor storage and higher intensity uses such as a body shop, repair shops, things of that nature. But for the most part, it will allow your retail, restaurants, most of your uses that would have people there either for office on a day-to-day basis or people coming by for shopping or for retail services. So it's a very broad category.
So, for example, it would allow a restaurant then?
Absolutely.
Yep. Okay. Mr. Colling, to take action on this, I think I heard you say earlier it would require a resolution, or you implied that it would?
Yes, Mr. President, we would need to take action on a resolution. I think this matter is brought to you for your information this evening, and based upon your discussions tonight, we would take this back and bring back a resolution if it meets with your approval.
Well, I think I heard Chief Sivak say there are certain buildings, certain types that he wouldn't object to if, at the 200 foot. But there are definitely buildings that he would. So, for example, a restaurant, I think you would object to that. I think I heard you say an office building probably would be acceptable. So, you know, one of the ways to go on this is to bring a resolution here that is pretty tight, that limits the type of building that could go on there, but you could also get the 200-foot exclusion then, but you wouldn't get it for everything that's could be built under the CZ zoning. Is that
Mr. President, if I could, Mr. Karski could come back with, I would suggest probably him working with Fire Chief Sivak to address the issue. What we've done in the past, as Chief Sivak had mentioned, the first variance that we had a fire specialist testify that based upon these mitigating measures that we feel comfortable to reduce those setbacks back. I think originally at one time there was going to be maybe mini storage units that were going to buffer in between the two. That may be a land use that would provide the necessary protection in case there ever was an explosion. You would have mini units, mini storage units, or some kind of a building in between the habitable portion of the commercial to the west and the wellhead that would provide the buffer necessary to protect the public interest, public safety as well. Come in with more of a definitive plan that you could look at to feel secure that to allow a reduction in the variance, going from 300 to 200 feet. That would be my suggestion. But if it's so open-ended, then they would need to work together to try to find a way to either list all the uses that could be allowed, which could be pretty long, or narrow it down some way so that you feel comfortable if you wanted to move forward with a variance on going from 300 to 200 feet. But at this point, it's pretty open-ended, and I think that's where staff is struggling at this point. We've done them in the past, but we've also had background material in order to do so.
Mr.
I
Jackson?
want to make sure I understand. Really, the only option we have, though, is to grant variance as far as the fire code will allow. Am I saying that correctly?
Well, Mr. Jackson, the variance would be to Chapter 40 of our code. There are fire code requirements in addition to that would prohibit certain use groups within the distance spacing that the fire code allows. As it stands now, the city is not able to grant a building permit for anything within that 300-foot spacing distance in the occupied structure. We could reduce that if the commission would see fit to grant a variance or a waiver to the requirements of Chapter 40, but the fire code requirements are always there with respect to uses.
Okay.
So the answer to his question was yes?
In a long way of saying it, yes.
I'm just, okay. Chief?
President Johnson, Commissioners, again, Mr. Karski, I know, is familiar with use groups or has resources available to him that are very familiar with use groups. And occupied structure is sometimes a confusing term. Group A, use group, assembly occupancies; E, educational occupancies; I, institutional occupancies, definitely by fire code need the 300-foot spacing. We've always maintained it. We've always asked for it. We've never had a variance on that. Those three use groups. Business occupancy, a group B, a business occupancy, a mercantile occupancy, it's not addressed by the code. It's not addressed by that. That's where Chapter 40 comes into play. And residential. And Mr. Karski does have an argument. There are residential occupancies in this area that are closer than 300 feet. I don't have a good reason for that. We weren't there. We just, it happened. It just happened, and should it have happened? Probably not, but yes, it did. So the other variances, if I'm not mistaken, dealt specifically with instances of single-family homes. I'm not sure about Dickinson Hills, but I know the Cook Meadow Hills was concerning just a single-family residence, not these other occupancies. So an office building could exist at 200 feet from that wellhead. Absolutely could. Storage facilities absolutely could. So there are those options, there are those use groups that are available. Thank you.
Mr. Karski?
I'll keep this quick. And I know you granted it for residential, which in my opinion, that is, 24 hours a day occupied. I'm not asking for 100 feet or 150 feet. I'm asking for 200, or even quite possibly the property line to lot 13. That would be, but, to eliminate a restaurant or things like that, I think is Police Fire Chief Sivak is going to err on the side of caution always. He gets paid to do that. I'm not asking for what these other places ask for. I'm asking for 200 feet. That's a big difference.
Mr. Karski, you stated for an office building. Can you give us an idea what the square footage would be of that office?
The original one I had designed, we were looking, I would like to do, if I did it, 10,000. I mean, as big as possible, to make full utilization. If you put a 5,000 square foot office or a 2,000 square foot office over there, well, it's 60,000 square feet. What do you do with the rest? I mean, it sits there, it doesn't look good. I mean, you'll have a nice little area that looks good, but what 2,000 square foot office needs 58,000 square foot of parking or landscaping on it?
In your lot, 75 feet, is that 13 or 12?
That would be lot 12. 12 has 75.
Lot 12.
The west 75 feet.
Does it make it, Chief, make it any better if that was designed where the parking would be greater on lot 12 than 13 and the structure farther from the 200 foot?
I'm not sure, Commissioner Steiner, I guess. The consistency that I'd like to maintain and that I hope you as the commission can maintain is that with these specific use groups, the assembly, the educational, and the institutional, we've never backed off of that 300 feet. That 300 feet's always been in the fire code. It's not new. And we've maintained that. We've maintained that in this area. The funeral parlor, which is an A assembly, has been made to maintain that 300-foot spacing right on the other end of this block. So we really need to maintain that consistency. Commissioner Steiner, back to your question, I guess I'm not sure what you're looking at or how you're looking at this.
Well, if he would design it so the building would be on the west barrier of lot 13, and his parking on the...
Parking's not an issue. The parking lot's not an issue. That can be within that area. We're talking the structure.
And with the variance, he's talking assembly. I don't have a problem with that variance eliminating schools, churches, that type of assembly. That's no problem. That would never be the plan.
Well, I appreciate that, but assembly is assembly by code, and that includes a restaurant. A restaurant is a place of assembly.
I think part of the issue here, Mr. Karski, I know I would be reluctant just to vote for a straight 200-foot variance to the property and no restrictions. I would be much more apt to be in favor of something very specific. If you came in and said it is an office building and this is what I want to do and it requires a 200-foot variance, well, I think something like that we can do.
The only problem with that, President Johnson, is if it's on the market, and it is on the market, and I'm looking at all my options, that really decreases my buyers if they don't know coming in.
Well, the new owner would be taking the same risk that you took when you bought it. You bought it after the ordinance was passed. If they meet with city officials, the city planner, the chief of the fire department, they'll find out there are uses where that land can be used, and they would come here and recommend that the variance be granted. But just to grant it carte blanche, I think that'd be hard for us to do. Now, I'm only speaking for myself. I think the others have to either say, President Johnson, we disagree with you, or we agree, but so you have some sense of what's going on.
Just remember, 1996, this well is an end-of-life well, and no incidents on it. That speaks for itself.
It does, but in the same respect, the reason that you're in the insurance business is for the unpredictable and for the unforeseen. And so when you, in your business, calculate risk, I've never had a house burned down, but I still have fire insurance. Even though there's never been an incident with this well since 1996, I can bet that they are insured in case there would be an
Absolutely.
incident. And I can bet that everything around it's insured for the improbable instance. So past performance doesn't indicate what the future will be. So
So you'd
those
suggest-
are issues that I would just bring up. You know, it's great that it's been safe since 1996, but it's no guarantee moving forward.
Sure, and that's why, you know, the setback was 100 and we're asking for
Right.
200. So you'd suggest I sit down with Mr. Sivak and,
I think you'd have to confine your, or limit your request to some pretty specific uses. Doesn't have to be, I guess, from what I've heard here tonight, wouldn't have to be just the one, the office building. I heard more things than that, but, you know, a resolution that would, in my view, be much more confining than just saying, hey, you got a 200-foot variance for anything you want to do that's within the CC zoning. I don't, I'd have a hard time supporting that. I don't have a hard time supporting a variance if it's much more specific. But again, just, you others have to,
Well, and it seemed like another good option was looking at what Carson said, moving the parking over because there's no restriction on parking and how far away it has to be, and utilizing, you know, all of lot 13 for your building or more
Sure.
of lot 13 for your building, and then you.
and that was why I purchased
And
that
then you
extra
still
75.
circumvent, yeah, and then you still circumvent that. So I think, you know, no one on this commission wants to limit business, wants to limit free enterprise, and wants to limit the options that you have. But in the same respect, city staff and fire chief are all saying there are some issues that we need to be aware of moving into this. So I would say that, I can't speak for everybody, that we're open to options and suggestions, but to sit here tonight and give you the full course of what CC offers wouldn't happen.
Anything else?
Does that give you an option with, obviously, you don't want to talk what the occupancy is going to be at.
Right.
Outside just an office building, but if that scenario, would that give you enough to work?
My
with?
understanding was an office building was eliminated in the code, but according to that, I might be
That would
wrong, so.
You'd be okay with an office building, correct, Chief?
There's a point of confusion, and it's unfortunate, but there is. An office building
It looks to me, I don't know, you must have put a pencil to this. It looks to me like you probably could get a building of 15 or 20,000 feet outside the 300.
Well, no, because there are oil lines that run through that lot.
Oh,
That's where the
okay.
oil well is pumped,
Okay.
about midway through. So that really limits it.
So not without moving
Yes.
pipelines?
Yes.
Okay.
And we've checked into moving the lines. It's a cost of about 100,000. I mean, it's,
well, maybe a good starting point is a meeting with Chief Sivak and get a good understanding, but what's possible from his perspective and what is totally out from his perspective. And I don't think from what I heard tonight, you're not have anything in mind that you were hoping to do that he would just say absolutely no to. So,
no, I did at one point an office design for there, but then my plans changed.
yeah.
Well, and incorporate the parking suggestion that Carson brought up. Maybe that frees up some more real estate for you too, and more uses for you as well. I think that was a really good suggestion.
So the gathering lines run in a westerly direction from that well site?
That is correct. West, they run to the corner, from about the center of the line to the corner,
Okay.
to the southwest corner.
So your only options then without moving the lines is basically put a parking lot across them or landscaping, so they have access.
Landscaping
if
or
there's a
parking,
break?
yes.
Okay.
It's just a really nice area of town, and it's my neighborhood, so I don't want to see storage buildings go up there. That was where my
I mean,
concern.
I would like to see it develop too. I mean, it's sat empty for years.
Correct.
And like Clayton said, we're encouraging development, you know, especially business. And I think if you guys work it out and find there's options in there, I think you can get it.
We will work
That
on
by
it.
us.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Karski. Well, we have a 5:15 timetable agenda items, and there are some rezoning petitions, and we'll have Mr. Cruton present these.
Mr. President, Commissioners, the first rezoning petition is from community commercial to low-density residential for properties that are located at 580 South Main Avenue, 577 First Avenue Southwest, and 585 First Avenue Southwest. The properties roughly total .68 acres, all combined. The Planning and Zoning Commission and city staff recommend approval. Mr. President?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cruton. You've heard his introduction and recommendation. Are there any comments or questions by commissioners?
Is this the issue that could have been a result of the tornado a few years ago when if these homes would have been damaged or destroyed, they could not have rebuilt residential?
That's correct. Trying to go back and determine when those properties were changed from residential to commercial, I haven't been able to determine that. Our records are not great going further back. But yes, that's the big issue that we explained to the residents, is that there are existing nonconformities. They wouldn't be able to rebuild or refinance. We are comfortable, based upon our comprehensive plan destination for those properties, that they are residential, so this makes sense to be consistent with it and allow them the ability to either sell or renovate their property.
Okay, and we can do this, these three properties with one single ordinance?
Yes, Mr. President. We should have made that a change to the agenda. I neglected to do that, but these properties are all located close to each other. They are identified and all in the draft ordinance that is in your packet.
So this is ordinance 1560.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. President,
Mr. Steiner?
I move we approve ordinance
Well,
1560.
not so fast. We gotta have a public hearing first.
We're gonna give it a
Well, I
chance.
know,
Okay.
is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on ordinance 1560? If so, you may do so now. Come to the podium, state your name. Anyone? There's no one that wishes to comment. Mr. Chair recognizes Mr. Steiner for the purpose of a motion.
Move to approve 1560.
Thank you. We have the motion to approve. Is there a second?
The second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and vote. Mr. Steiner.
Aye.
Mr. Oldman.
Aye.
Mr. Jackson.
Aye.
Mr. Decker.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Mr. President, the next one is, we talked about the north properties. This is the south properties. Properties are 618 South Main Avenue and 619 First Avenue Southwest. The same situation applies. Going from community commercial to low-density residential, they are consistent with the comprehensive plan, and city staff and planning commission recommend approval. Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. Cruton. At this time, I'll declare the public hearing open. Anybody wishing to comment on ordinance 1561 may do so now. Come to the podium, state your name. I'll hear your comments. Anyone on 1561? There's no one that wishes to comment on 1561. Any comments by commissioners? Is there a motion regarding 1561?
Move to approve, Mr. President.
Is there a second? We have the motion and second. Any discussion? Go ahead and vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Decker?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Brings us to our 5:20 timetable agenda item, and that's to hear presentation on the KLJ water rate study, and Brant Molson will make that presentation. Thank you. Welcome.
President Johnson, Commissioners. It's really the City of Dickinson's water rate study, it's not KLJ's.
Oh.
But we'll go through it tonight, go through a lot of different things with you. We do have a PowerPoint presentation. I believe Public Works Zurich distributed copies, so hopefully you can follow along with me. Presentation tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the study methodology, the rate setting procedures, projected revenue, debt service on the major water system improvements, proposed rates and examples, calculations of how we came up with a proposed base rate, show you how that compares to surrounding area, various other cities in North Dakota. And of course, we'll finish up with some recommendations as to base rates, water access charges, and other recommendations. We did not reinvent the wheel with this study. You had a study completed back in March for your sewer portion of it, and Apex, their study was an excellent example of what to follow. So, and we want to have consistency with that study as well, so we did follow a lot of what they did. For this particular effort, the revenue sources we looked at were certainly a base rate adjustment and also your water access charges. The water access charges provides equity between the new and long-time customers and provides a way for new customers to pay their share of the existing system. Another big portion of the study methodology is actually your equivalent dwelling units. Right now, we're using a number of 15,000 for the city of Dickinson. And that too came forward from the Apex study. You know, any process like this certainly has some goals, and what we're trying to achieve here is make sure that the financial stability of the water utility is there. A key component of that is a strong cash balance. There's always the unexpected. It's previously been recommended that's 20 to 50% of the utility's annual budget, and I think we're there, are we not, Public Works Director Zerf? We're looking okay there? And then we certainly want to determine fair and equitable rates for all the customers and allow management to make sound long-term decisions, because you've talked about a lot of those already tonight. You do have to make some decisions for your city going forward. A big portion of this is the water access charges. That was a back and forth process. We worked a lot with staff on that. We took a good look at where they are today, what are the potential new connections going forward, and what are the city's raw water meter costs as part of that. Based upon that effort, it looks like we have about $710,000 that we can apply towards some of the costs that we have to try and recoup. How we came up with that? We looked at the number of hookups that you've had in the past, 2012, 2013. You averaged about 396 in 2012, 362 in 2000. That's supposed to be 13, not 2003. That's anyway, you averaged about 380 meters, new meter connections every year, and we applied what we're proposing for the new WAC charges to that to try to come up with what that revenue source would be. 300 residentials would equate about $750,000. Commercial would add another $275,000, but you have city raw costs of about over $300,000 just to supply those meters and the labors and that sort. So that's how we come up with the net contribution of the WAC fees per year of about $710,000. I think City Manager Kessel, you think next year these connection fees will, or possible connections will probably be even higher. Isn't that what I think you are?
Yeah, I think we're anticipating, and I think Community Development Director Corton would agree that 2015 is likely to be on pace or on par with 2014 in terms of building permit issuance and such.
So the 350 is a little conservative, maybe?
I would say so. I mean, with respect to it, I think that we're going to be comparable to, actually not 2014, 2012 are record numbers because of the normal demand that we have for each year and then the pin-up demand we've had for the last 2 years moving forward. So that may be a very conservative number.
Okay. And then we took a good look at the projects, what to include in these calculations. And we picked those water system improvement projects that we felt benefited the whole, like the storage facilities, the main water transmission lines, your pumping stations, some of your studies. And I think that back in July this year when you had to initiate your emergency water rationing, because basically your storage systems on the north side were dangerously low. I think you can see that having more storage in these types of facilities to help recharge the system is a benefit to everyone. It's not just a benefit to a few. The projects that were included, I think there's some of those, the main ones that we've talked to you about before. There's your finished water pump station, new west side 1 million gallon storage, your dedicated 24-inch main to the west, your east side 24-inch main, and all of these. And the total of these projects is about 37 million. And as was pointed out earlier, the State Water Commission has granted you 18 million already towards these types of projects. And on the finished water pump station, they're all actually paying another $570,000. So between grants, you have about 24 million that's been put into the system. So based upon the cost of these projects, you got about $13 million you need to try to recoup.
Just one clarification, it's 5.7 million on the finished water pump station.
That's what I have up there.
Yeah, you said 570,000 though.
Okay.
I did the same thing. I said 14
okay.
and meant 12.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Anyway, between what they've contributed to the finished water pump station and their other grant, you have 24 million that you can use towards your water projects, correct? Leaving you a little over 13 million that you have to deal with. Based upon that, we follow the same calculations that were used in the past, and that means your annual service debt is about $840,000 a year that you're going to need to try to recoup. These numbers are then plugged into it. We have annual debt of $840,000. We have our annual WAC fees we're predicting to be about $710,000, leaving you a balance of about $130,000 a year that you need to recoup. Based upon 15,000 equivalent dwelling units, that means we're short about $8.65 or 72 cents a month. So that's where we came up with the recommendation, increase the base rate from $9.25 to $10. So that's how that was calculated. And again, we went back and we did some comparisons, checked with various other cities. You can see that under your existing condition, Dickinson's just a little bit high compared to the other cities. And with the base increase, we'd be about $33.15, about another 2.3% increase. And each city does it a little bit different, how they compute their base rates, but this was all based upon 5,000 gallons. From the recommendation side, we're recommending implement the base rate increases of 75 cents. Implement proposed base monthly rate service increases for the other meter sizes, and also implement the proposed WAC fees. We'll walk through this a little bit, but then we do need to make a correction to this. Public Works Director Zerf pointed out something that we need to make correct before we go farther with this. But basically, where it says 5/8 and 3/4 inch meters, we'd go to $10 a month. Right now, there's 1,000 5/8 meters in the city. They're no longer used, but the base rate for those 5/8 meters is $6. So we wouldn't want to propose a $4 a month raise for those. We just want to leave that at $6.75, take that up 75 cents too. So that's the one change we would need to make to this. The other increases were just basically, we looked at what the difference was between on your old existing rate, and we applied that same proration to the new base rate, and that's how they came out. 6-inch, for instance, would go from $250 to $270 a month, about an 8% increase across the board. Again, for a 5/8 meter, that would just go to $6.75. This is where we spent a lot of time on the WAC charges. Again, you know, we're trying to get new users to help pay a portion of what's been put in place for them to take benefit of. Your current WACs are like $500 for 3/4 inch meters and below. The proposed is $2,500. The current SAC is what you guys implemented a few months ago, so we listed those as well. and then the city's raw meter costs for each one of those. So like on a 3/4 inch, you would net about $200 or $2,000 for each connection. When you get up to your 6-inch connection, your cost of the meters alone is $10,000. So you'd net about $5,000 on a 6-inch connection. Guess some of the other recommendations we saw as we went through the study is I think you need to evaluate your utilities revenues and expenses yearly to determine if a rate adjustment is needed. One thing that wasn't included in the calculation was you've had an annual water replacement cost of about $1 million a year. We know that there are some system deficiencies that will have to be addressed. So that's one area you might need to include these costs in the user rates. To date, the budget has been able to absorb that $1 million. I think too, we need to go back and just kind of do a spot review of all the billings to make sure if somebody has a 1-inch meter, they're paying the base rate based upon a 1-inch meter, that sort of thing. And then continue to assess the city's equivalent dwelling units, because that is a big part of this whole calculation. We were able to justify the 15,000. I feel very comfortable that you do have 15,000 equivalent, but I think you do need to take a good look at that, and I think there's some ways that you can verify that going forward with your new SCADA systems and some of that thing. I'm sure you have some questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions or comments?
I have a question for Director Zuroff. Most of the 5/8 are at, you said they're at $6, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you just proposed to go to $6.75.
That's correct.
Those are mostly old residential.
Right, we don't install 5/8 meters anymore, they're all 3/4. And I didn't get that information to Mr. Molson earlier, but they are currently base rate of $6, and I think we'd look at a 75-cent increase on that base rate also.
And do we have a number on how many are the 5/8?
There's a little over 1,000, 1,015, a little over 1,000.
Okay, out of that other number that was presented then.
Right.
On the page where you compare the rates in other communities, you had Mandan's is not available. I'm curious why.
I just couldn't find it on the website, and I didn't have time to go over and sit down with their public works director and get the information.
And a couple of these cities, their charges are so many dollars per 748 gallons. Why is that?
Mr. Johnson and Commission, I'm familiar with that. We used to be based on cubic meters.
Oh, sure.
So you have a cubic meter instead of a gallon meters.
Okay,
So everything's based on your 748 gallons
all right. Is that a cubic meter?
per 1,000.
Yeah, okay, per 1,000 cubic meters?
700.
That's fine.
748 gallons.
I don't need the other, it's
Yeah.
not close enough. Well, I think the study's well done, but at the end of the day, it looks to me like Dickinson is very much on the high side compared to our sister cities in the state, at least the major ones that, and this is based on 5,000 gallons a month usage, but we're paying more for our water than most everybody else, it looks to me.
And you don't really make anything off that. 2 cents a 1,000 gallons, I believe it is.
Well, the city, yes. I mean, we're trying to make enough.
whatever you take
We're trying to
in, you're
make
paying
enough
out,
to
yeah.
cover some
Right. Whatever you
additional
take in there
capital
on that
expenditures.
463,
Yeah.
you're basically paying back out to the state
Yeah.
water commission.
Right,
Mr.
that's,
Kessel.
Commissioner, or President Johnson, that's exactly what I was just going to mention, is that our base rate that we are charged from Southwest Water is higher than most of these consumption rates in the rest of the cities. So that's a cost that's outside of our control for the most part. You'll notice that the base rates were very competitive in a strictly base rate comparison, but the consumption rate is where we tend to be a little higher.
Then you certainly don't have the O&M costs of a water treatment plant either.
No, but that's somebody else does, and that somebody else
disgusting.
passes it on to us, so
Correct.
we have it.
Yeah.
Mr. Kessler, as you were working through the budget numbers, were you incorporating these new rate charges or not?
We have not. The budget that is worked out now does not include these. And this is the recommendation that you're receiving this evening. We've
Right.
gone through several iterations prior to this one. I'm really comfortable with this iteration and certainly make a recommendation to approve it. They've done a lot of nice work. Our increase was much higher than this when we originally started. So I commend Mr. Malsom and Mr. Zeroff for the work that has been done to get this to a reasonable and acceptable level.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a basic assumption here too that for other water and wastewater projects, and this is just the water charges, this doesn't include the wastewater charges.
That's correct.
So, but I'm sure that part of the assumption is that oil impact funds are going to pick up a fair amount of debt service on other water and wastewater projects, because you certainly didn't include all the water projects that we're doing, and so.
Right, we went through and selected the ones that we thought were most appropriate to pay for with rate revenue. And you're right, there's several other water projects that aren't included in this list. There will be other revenue sources we'll pay for.
Do we keep separate accounting of the WAC charges? I assume
Yes.
we must. And what are those dollars being used for today?
They're a revenue stream to the water fund and wastewater fund. So they would be equivalent
So it's
to
commingled
Correct.
with the usage charges.
Yes, we account for them separately, but then, yes, the revenue are commingled in the end.
Commissioner Jackson, for example, the connection fees are listed separately in revenue stream, but also the connection fees for water, for example, one of the things we found out, that was basically set up just to pay for the meters. I mean, so, I think we had a $500 or a $300, $400 5/8 or 3/4 connection fee. That's the cost of the meter and doesn't include installation and all that. So the connection fee basically just paid for the meter. And there it is listed separately as a revenue stream.
Any other comments or questions?
I have one, I guess, for Mr. Kessel and Mrs. Zeroff. The water, when we do start to sell it, the non-potable water, that'll funnel back right into the same fund as we were talking?
Those revenues will go back into the water wastewater fund. It is anticipated that they'll be primarily used to pay back debt service on the SRF loan.
Okay.
And we're working through how exactly we're going to sell that water, either as a retailer or a wholesaler.
But if those funds more than covered the debt service, then we could use them to build our cash reserve there and reduce water and wastewater rates. If they turned out that we could sell a significant portion of that water.
Exactly, and that's Mr. Malsom referred to that. We could do an annual rate study. If the revenue far exceeds our expenses, we could then drop these rates into the future, as long as we have enough to continue to cover our debt obligation.
When you get that new software, you can just drop all this data into there too, and then you'll have it.
Okay. Whose software?
Whatever he comes up
Are you going to
with.
go home and write it for us?
No, I don't want no part of it.
But I mean, that's right now, that's a huge unknown, and it's hard to plan any of that in, because I think we are expecting upwards of 3 million, on average, 3 million gallons per day out of that wastewater treatment plant. And, you know, if you sold it all at a reasonable price, it's a pretty big number. The odds of selling it all are probably pretty slim, but you never know.
I will say to the commission that we are working on that very issue, and hopefully we'll be able to provide you with a presentation within the very near future, within the next quarter.
President Johnson, Commission, and that was one during budget too. It was first we had the water reuse in the wastewater fund, but actually it's geared toward the wastewater plant, you know, in the reuse. So that's where we're looking at budgeting the reuse station and then the income off the reuse water. So and anything that hopefully we gain on that can reduce the debt service for the wastewater side.
The other thing that it does is any revenues that come into the enterprise fund, there is a percentage of that that we can move to the general fund. So if you got into a position where you really had excess revenues, you can move monies to the general fund, which in effect reduce your property tax. So that would be a good thing too.
We're currently allocated from state law up to 20% of those revenue, enterprise revenue funds could go into the general fund. We're budgeted and have been for some time to do 10. So if you just left that as a percentage and had a nice revenue increase, leaving the percentage at 10 might provide you with a really nice bump in revenue to the general fund. Or you could increase it to a number beyond 10 as long as it was under 20.
Other comments? We don't have to take action on this tonight. I think what you will do is put this into that entire rate resolution, and then we act on it. But, you know, at this point, I think if there's someone that says, I think this is too much or not enough, you need to speak up now because they will be preparing that overall city rate resolution. Anybody uncomfortable with it being too much? So, well, then I would think that in that rate resolution you would reflect these recommendations. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that brings us down to item D, extraterritorial zone extension. Again, this is an ordinance, and Mr. Kessel, are you introducing this item?
I am. Thank you, President Johnson. The map that you have in front of you is identical to the one that we handed out at the last commission meeting. We were asked to go back and verify the lines to make sure that they complied with state law. We did that. Ms. Marshik did that herself. And I will say that even though, you know, we talked a lot about a 2-mile limit on our ETZ boundary, which this takes advantage of in most cases, but not all. State law says that as long as preponderance of a quarter section, you need to have a preponderance in order to bring it in. And if that means that your line goes beyond 2 miles, you're okay. But it has to have a majority of the space be within that quarter. So there are places where this may actually exceed 2 miles. It shouldn't be very much beyond 2 miles, but it could actually be beyond. So there's been no revisions. We did present this to the County Commission as well. They seem to accept the boundaries. Their input simply was actually to take advantage of more if we so chose. So we're asking the City Commission to review the document before you, and our recommendation as a staff is to adopt it as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Kessel. Mr. Colleen, I've got this down as ordinance 1562.
Yes, Mr. President.
Right number, okay. So before we start up here with the commissioners, I'll just ask if there's anyone from the public that would like to comment regarding proposed ordinance 1562. You may do so now. Just come to the podium, state your name, and we'll hear your comments. Is anybody from the public? There's no one from the public, so any comments or questions by city commissioners? Not, is there a motion regarding the first reading of ordinance 1562?
I'll move we approve first reading of 1562.
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote then. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Decker?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries. Brings us to item E, that's Mr. Kessel's reports. So we'll let you go ahead and give your reports, Mr. Kessel.
Thank you, President Johnson. I just have one formal report for you this evening. It's regarding our procurement ordinance. We have presented that or attached that for your review. This ordinance was created several decades ago, and it's regarding how we, or what rules we have to follow with regard to public bidding of acquisition of certain properties or equipment. When this procurement ordinance was created back in the 1950s or 1960s, we set a standard that was much more restrictive than state law. State law currently uses the $100,000 figure as the boundary by which we have to go to a public bid. We chose in the city of Dickinson to set that boundary at $20,000 for a majority of our purchases. $20,000 back in the 50s and 60s bought you a lot more than it does today. And this ordinance has become cumbersome to work with, and it has actually slowed some of our projects. When you're talking about pumps that cost, hundreds of thousands of dollars today, that's the order of magnitude of some of our purchases. Now, that specific example wouldn't have been incurred by this ordinance change, but several others would be. And so we're asking that the City Commission consider recognizing the state law at $100,000 and remove the $20,000 procurement number that's currently in our ordinance and just simply change it to state law at $100,000. There might be several examples that maybe even Public Works Director Zuroff could give to you where the $20,000 limit has caused concern with regard to some of those projects.
Thank you, Mr. Kessel. For example, even like services on some of our larger water main breaks or replacements, some of the contractors, you can't get some of the contractors in for $20,000 for some of these projects. So for services in that regard, we would have to bid that out to get services for a small couple stick line replacement. Some of our like Mr. Kessel said, some of our pumps or some smaller equipment anymore easily exceeds $20,000. That means we have to do specs and bid it out for anything that's over that limit. It makes it real cumbersome. I discussed it with our managers today. I think if this is approved, I think policy would be at least to get quotes, make sure we're get prices from all local entities if available, and get quotes, and still do due diligence in getting the best price, but at least we'd alleviate the public bid process, and which makes it real difficult. Thank you.
Anybody have concerns about their request? No, and then I think you go ahead and bring your proposed ordinance to us, and we have an opportunity at first reading and second reading to make any changes if we so desire.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and that ends my reports for this evening.
Okay, go down to engineering, and item A are some task orders, and Ms. Marshak will present those.
Good evening, President Johnson, Commissioners. The first item is Task Order 7, which is a task order with KLJ to have them design streets for an SID project on 15th and 16th Avenues East. This is just north of the East Business Loop. The cost is a not-to-exceed amount of $49,190. We selected KLJ through an RFP process, and we recommend approval of this agreement.
Is this task order 8 that you just presented? On my agenda, it says task order 8.
It could be.
Well,
I don't have the list in front of me.
We'll take we'll take 8 number first, but you called it task order 7, and task order 7 on my agenda is the street lighting one. Is the agenda wrong?
Yep, because I have task order 8 as street lighting, so they must be
Okay.
flipped on yours.
All right, so we'll make that change. Task order number 8 is the street lighting. Task order number 7 is what's labeled here as Fisher East Side Second.
That sounds right.
Is that right? Okay. So you've heard her presentation. Are there any comments or questions regarding task order number 7? Not, is there a motion regarding task order number 7?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion, the second. Is there any discussion?
Mr. President, I'm going to abstain from both votes, no matter how they're numbered.
Okay. Any other discussion? No further discussion. We'll go ahead and vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Decker?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson abstains. The chair votes aye. The motion carries.
The next task order I have is an SID for street lighting in Cook Meadow Hills, 1st through 4th edition. This is again with KLJ. It is a not-to-exceed task order in the amount of $88,729. KLJ, again, was selected through an RFP process to perform this work, and we recommend approval of this agreement.
Okay, thank you. You've heard her introduction and recommendation. Any comments or questions here? Is there a motion regarding task order number 8?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Decker?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson abstains. The chair votes aye. The motion carries.
Thank you.
I would instruct the secretary that if indeed these are still mixed up, the intent of the commission is that they both pass and have that so reflected in the minutes. Move to item B. This is possibility of approving an engineering agreement for professional services, and City Engineer Kubas will introduce the item.
Thank you, President Johnson, Commissioners. This is a construction engineering agreement with a firm Short, Elliott, and Hendrickson. They go by SEH. This is for the 15th Street project. We discussed it at meetings past. It'll be the road that'll be a joint access between the Westridge subdivision on the west side of town and the Pinecrest subdivision. This contract will allow SEH to perform the contract administration, construction inspection, and construction staking on 15th Street West. The plan right now is that the project will be constructed over a 2-year period with the water and sewer going in 2014, with streets to follow in 2015. Developers, per our 15th Street agreement that we had signed with Roars and the Pinecrest Group, will be paying for 100% of the construction and construction engineering. This agreement is for, it was broken out into 2 amounts. There's a lump sum amount for staking for $60,000, and the construction engineering is an hourly contract not to exceed $175,000. City staff recommend approval. Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. Kubas. You've heard his presentation, his recommendation. Do you have comments or questions? Not, is there a motion regarding this item?
Move to approve contract, Mr. President.
Second.
We have the motion to approve and the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Decker?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Mr. Kubas, do you have any project updates?
I have one project update, and it's rather critical. It's some work that we have going on. We've talked about the finished water pumping station. That project is underway, and our east 24-inch water main project also underway. Two separate contracts. Next week, we'll be making the connection between the plant and our water mains. I kind of liken it to an open heart surgery. We're going to go offline for a while. So we're asking our residents to conserve water, probably starting early next week, Sunday, Monday. Right now, the plan tentatively would be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We don't think it's going to take 3 days to make this connection between the finished water pump station and that main on Broadway. But what we really need is to go into this with our tanks full and have our full reserve capacity throughout our system. So we're asking for some conservation, hopefully. I don't think we're having any hot weather next week forecasted. But we'll refine this some more. We'll work on a public service announcement to really pin down the dates. Right now, like I said, we're targeting the 9th through the 11th. So starting maybe on Sunday the 7th, Monday the 8th, and then through that time, we'd ask for some conservation. Right now, what we've talked about as city staff would be no outside water use for that time.
All right. Well, good luck on that open heart surgery. Any comments or questions for the city engineer? All right. Mr. Zuroff, do you have any project updates you'd like to make?
Yeah, I've got one on our chip seal, and then I have some pictures I want to show. Our chip seal project will begin this week also, so you should have flyers in your door, and it should go quick and fast, but I just wanted to put out that be aware of construction equipment out there and the chip seal project. I'm going to go to the podium if I may, President Johnson.
Please.
Now, this isn't a real formal presentation. I just took some pictures last week that I thought would be interesting. This is their water reclamation facility, and if you notice up here is our headworks. In other words, that's where our influent pump station pumps to this building right here, headworks, and then to our what's called our basins and our IFAS system right here. I wanted to show you that because this is that IFAS system that I pointed to. It's got the different basins in it, and in these basins is your media. And I just wanted to show you that we have the media in there, and we have the wastewater processing in those basins. And if you notice, each one of these little wafers are about like a quarter. And the whole idea is to get the bacteria grow on the media and to start treating the wastewater. 2 weeks ago, actually 2 weeks, tomorrow, we had our West Pump Station working. The pumps were pumping to the water reclamation facility. So currently, 8 hours a day, we are pumping to our wastewater facility, and everything's working, and we're starting to grow, I guess, the bugs, as they say, in our plant. So this is in these four basins, and we're pumping air into those and starting to grow the bacteria needed to treat our wastewater. I know you'd be all excited to see that, so I brought those as pictures. This is a picture of our admin building. You notice it's a little further behind. The intent was to get the process started, and that was the priority. The admin building and the biosolids don't have the time frame, aren't needed as quickly as getting the process going so we can get the treatment started. I went out to the west lift station. You probably can see that on intersection of Old Highway 10 and the West Business Loop. I went out there, there's a progress meeting, and they're coming along very nicely with that project. Just some pictures there. This is where the generator that was just on the truck, you can see to the right, the generator is going to be behind this wall. The reason they built that is Dickinson Hills is just north of that, and this nice decorative wall will be in front of that generator, and I think be a nice looking facility. In that, I guess I can kind of show you here, about right in here is a picture of this. This is the biofilter that's part of the project. It's probably 15, 20 feet tall, and what the biofilter does is reduces any smell coming off the lift station. And I thought that was quite interesting. If you could hold a second. I just passed around a filter and some rock that's part of this biofilter. You get a bacteria to grow on that also, and actually you feed it fertilizer, a little polymer, you feed it, and this biofilter is more intense than the other biofilters because we knew this would be in a busy part of town. This removed, they said, I think 99% of any smell going through the system. So I thought that was interesting and quite impressive. There's the picture of what I just passed around. This is the filter itself, and then this is, I think, carbon-induced. I think there's carbon on there to help reduce the smell. This is another portion of that building. This is the chemical tank, which I wanted to show. We also have chemical injection for downstream smells and issues. We can inject chemical. Right now, we don't look like we'll need to use a lot of chemical this coming year. And speaking of budget, this is one of the things on all our lift stations have this. The Highway 10 influent pump, the West, and lift station 12 all have chemical injection, and that cost can be quite expensive. So some of this is unknown. I don't think we'll need it this whole year, but after the 2015 year, I think we'll get a better idea of exactly how many dollars we're talking about, and for chemical use and what we need. This is in the basement of that lift station. You can see the pumps are in. Everything's about close to start operation on the West, so it's coming along nice. They're finishing some of the electrical conduit. The pumps in, the piping's getting done, and the walls are up. So that's the end of my show and tell, but I wanted to update the commission on those. I'll sure take any questions if you want.
Well, thank you, Mr. Zuroff. These are certainly major projects. Trying to remember, I think that West lift station is a $12 or $13 million project. I mean, it's a big project by
Correct.
itself. You know.
It is a big project. We do call it the West Lift Station. In our operations, we have a number for it. I was told by Administrator Kessel that I might need to quit calling it the West Pump Station. Is the way the city grows, it might be our central lift station.
True. So we'll call it Zuroff number 1.
Thank you.
So, okay, let's Let's move to community development, and Mr. Cretan, you have some plats that you'd like to introduce.
Yes, Mr. President. The first item is a final plat for Hospital Acres. This is a final plat for Hospital Acres second subdivision. The site is located to the north of Fairway, to the east of I-94 Business Loop, and to the west of 23rd Avenue West. It is approximately 68 acres. The Planning and Zoning Commission and city staff recommend approval. Mr. President?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cretan. Are there comments or questions? This is a resolution, and it's Resolution 50-2014. If there are no comments or questions, would there be a motion regarding this resolution?
I'll move that we approve 50-2014.
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Jackson. Mr. Altman.
Aye.
Mr. Decker.
Aye.
Mr. Steiner.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
The next final plat is for the Gladden subdivision. The Gladden subdivision is located south of 32nd Street Southwest and to the west of Highway 22. It is approximately 30 acres. Planning and Zoning Commission and city staff recommend approval. Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. Cretan. You've heard his introduction, recommendations. Do you have any questions, comments? Not, I assume this resolution 51-2014, is there a motion regarding this resolution?
Motion to approve?
Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Altman.
Aye.
Mr. Decker.
Aye.
Mr. Jackson.
Aye.
Mr. Steiner.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Mr. President, the next item is a zoning text amendment. I inadvertently put the wrong zoning text amendment in the memo summary. The resolution or the ordinance is correct, refers the right one. The zoning text amendment tonight is one that would require any replats of property that is described as an unplatted parcel, meets and bounds description, would require them to be platted. Other jurisdictions in the state of North Dakota require that. One benefit of requiring rezonings is to be proactive in the measure, to get ahead of the development, to secure dedication. Dedication is normally taken care of as part of the platting process. We have done that in the past, but it's not clear, and this would clarify that issue that any rezoning of property would require platting for that. In addition to that, I'm changing the zoning code that would reference that specific language that would state that any rezoning of property would require it. So we're amending the section in Chapter 34, which is subdivisions, to include language that specifies it, and then also new language in Chapter 39, the zoning code. And with that, I can answer any questions you may have.
So, Mr. Colling, this will be ordinance 1563, and the intent here is to have first reading?
That's correct, Mr. President.
Okay. So you've heard Mr. Cretan's introduction and his recommendations. Ordinance 1563 is in your packet. Are there any comments or questions? Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on proposed ordinance 1563? If you would, you may do so now by coming to the podium, stating your name, and we'll hear your comments. Anybody from the public? Okay, there's no one from the public. Comments or questions here by commissioners? Would there be a motion regarding first reading of 1563?
I'll make the motion.
We have the motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Decker?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. So the motion carries.
Mr. President, I just have one last item that's not on the agenda. It's a meeting reminder for commission members, September 22nd from 9 to 11 in the morning. We are having the presentation of the West Dickinson Plan, the draft plan. It will be a joint meeting with the City Commission and then also the Planning Commission during that time, so please make yourself available for that. KLJ will be presenting the draft. West Dickinson plan. It will be in a very rough form. We're here to get your comments before we finalize that, and then we'll be coming back in November after taking comments from you and the Planning Commission to bring a more finalized document, and then proceed in December for the adoption of the West Dickinson plan, if that pleases you.
Okay. On my agenda, we have a Rolling Hills Development Agreement.
Yes, we do, and I will defer that to City Engineer Kubas.
Oh, okay.
President Johnson, Commission, I think that the DA we have here is for the Rolling Hills development. It's our standard DA template language. There were some real unique engineering conditions placed on this development. I think it really shows that our water modeling and our sewer modeling are paying off. This is about the most specific we've gotten with the development agreement. Essentially, what we're asking the developer to do is we modeled their development for water capacity is they needed to make an extra connection to loop the water. And what we found is that if they loop the water, there's a gap in the water main on 8th Street. And so our development agreement asks them to fill that gap in, and those will be a separate set of plans. They've already submitted their plans for their development. And then the other engineering condition that we've placed on this development is for their sewer capacities, and it limits the amount of units that they can build and occupy until we have upgrades to lift station 5, I believe it is. So those are the two unique engineering conditions on this development. But we've been meeting with this developer several times throughout the past year, and city staff recommend approval.
Thank you, Mr. Kubas. You've heard his introduction and his recommendation. Do you have comments or questions? If not, is there a motion regarding this development agreement?
Move to approve, Mr. President.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Decker?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, so the motion carries. Are there any comments or reports by city commissioners? Not, is there anyone from the public that would like to address the commission? If so, you may do so now. Come to the podium, state your name, we'll hear your comments. There's no one from the public that wishes to address the commission. The chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. The motion carries.